And good evening and welcome to the Kaufman Corner podcast. The good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, Soren Petro with you as we cover the Royals draft. I've been out of it for a couple of weeks. We lean heavily on Rany Jazayerli's meticulous notes he's been taking throughout this MLB draft. There's been a lot going on. We're in a little bit of a lull with the All-Star break and everything going on. We'll get into more of the trades, the Aroldis Chapman type stuff on next week's podcast. We're going to focus on the draft. Did they get it right? High school catcher. It always works when you take a high school catcher. Really, it does. Trust me, even
Guaranteed.
though nothing you look at anywhere will ever tell you that, we're going to assume that it's going to work. We break it all down right now on the Kaufman Corner podcast.
You're listening to Kaufman Corner, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Gann Asphalt and Concrete is now hiring for all positions. Project manager, dump truck drivers, operators, and crew members. Starting pay up to $30 per hour based on experience. With paid time off and insurance, just to name a few of the benefits. Check out GannAsphalt.com for more info. Now, here's your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
All right, back at it. Better late than never. We of course moved back a day. We wanted to get a little bit more of the Royals draft flavor in here. Get more than just the first couple of picks to digest. But of course, the number one pick is going to be a big part of the conversation here, Rany. Let's start with it. First of all, good to be back with you live. We had one of our Kaufman Corner podcasts that we had to tape up, although I think it's one of my favorite ones, J.J. Cooper from Baseball America. Just such a fantastic guest and always great to talk to him. So that was a lot of fun, and I thought he gave us great insight into this draft. I don't know that we're loving the draft. We'll get into our thoughts here in a minute, but let's just start right there, Rany. What's your overall impression with the first selection, or do you want to go with the draft overall so far?
Well, I don't think you can really talk about the draft without talking about the first pick, because the Royals were drafting eighth. This was not a late first round pick. This is just to give you a flavor, the value, the draft bonus value of that first pick was almost $6 million, 5.98, I believe. Their second pick, the 44th overall pick, the value of that pick was 1.95. So literally 3 times more valuable than their second pick. So that gives you an idea of the way the industry sees a top 10 pick. And so if you're going to save some money on that first pick, you better have a damn good reason. I don't know if that's if what the Royals did, they have a good enough reason for it. And let's start there. Let's start with Blake Mitchell. We'll get to Blake Wolters later. The Royals drafted all the Blakes: Blake Griffin, Blake Bortles, Blake Shelton, William Blake, I believe. But Blake Mitchell was their first pick. And I said before the draft, there was a consensus top 5 guys that, of course, if any of those guys fell, we would have been thrilled to have. They did not. They went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in some order. But to me, there was a pretty clear second tier consisting of one player, and that was a catcher, but a college catcher named Kyle Teel. I've heard Keith Law described him as almost like a left-handed Jason Kendall. And if you remember Jason Kendall as a Royal, then that's not the Jason Kendall we're talking about. That was a shell of the young Jason Kendall, who could hit for average, who could steal bases, get on base. Was basically the rare catcher, was a perfect leadoff hitter. I think Kyle Teel, that would have been my pick. He had the combination of a a high ceiling and a high floor. Like I think he could have been. He will be an everyday catcher in the major leagues, and he's fairly close to the major leagues. The risk for as catchers go, the risk was low with him. College catchers tend to work out. High school catchers in the first round historically do not. And Blake Mitchell is a high school catcher. He is a very talented player. This pick absolutely could work out. He could become a star. Any first rounder could be a star. Any prospect, anybody drafted could be a star. So, this is we're always weighing probabilities here. There's always a chance that this pick works out, but the risk to me was not worth the reward. And the simplest way to explain why is to look where he was ranked by all the different organizations out there. I'm not cherry picking here. I've got, MLB.com, the league's own website, had him ranked as the 14th best player in the draft. That's the high water mark. Baseball America had him at 15th. Keith Law at The Athletic had him at 20th. And Kylie McDaniel at ESPN had him at 29th. This was a consensus, not top 10 player, barely top 15, and maybe even a bottom half of the first round kind of player, because of the risk of his position. High school catchers historically don't work out. He is the highest catcher drafted out of high school since a player named Kyle Skipworth was taken by the Marlins, eighth overall in 2008. Do you remember Kyle Skipworth?
The immortal Kyle Skipworth.
The immortal Kyle Skipworth. I read ESPN reported that he did not make the major leagues. That is untrue. That is a scandalous lie. He did make the major leagues. He never got a hit in the major leagues because he only had 4 plate appearances. He did draw a walk, though, so let's not shortchange the man. But to give you an idea of where he was taken, one pick before Kyle Skipworth. Sorry, he was taken 6th overall. The 5th pick in that draft was Buster Posey, college catcher, soon to be Hall of Famer Buster Posey. The 7th pick right after him was Yonder Alonso, who didn't have a great major league career, but was a productive player for a few years. That gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Then the next catcher taken was a college catcher, Jason Castro, who had a long and occasionally productive career in the major leagues. Kyle Skipworth did not. There's a lot of risk there. On top of that, Blake Mitchell is quite old for his draft class. He will turn 19 in a couple weeks. And you may not have seen this because I knew you were traveling, but something about his date of birth caught my eye. He's born on August 3rd. And I knew that date sounded familiar. And so I had to look it up. Do you know what other player was born on August 3rd?
Is it Bubba Starling?
Bubba Starling was born on August 3rd. So that's another mark against him. Now, having said that,
that's actually not a mark against him. Let me go ahead and stick up. That's called coincidence, but okay.
It is. It is a coincidence, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results. And I think it's funny. It's if you believe in omens, maybe it's bad. But I'm not holding that against him. And I go back to my favorite example of this, which was the year the Royals drafted a high school right-hander by the name of Colt Griffin with a top 10 pick, one of the all-time busts in draft history. The legendarily the first high school pitcher ever to be recorded throwing 100 miles an hour, and got drafted by the Royals and immediately was throwing 90 miles an hour and never made it out of Double-A. The very next year, the Royals took another high school right-hander. And if you believe in coincidences, you would think that was the absolute worst thing in the world to do. That the player they took the following year was Zach Greinke.
Yeah.
So the fact that, not every player born on August 3rd is going to be bad. And I will say that J.J. Cooper did, in addition to being a fantastic guest, he really did open my eyes a little to the reality that the industry has adjusted to the importance of age with draft picks. And the best way I can describe this was when I was a teenager, learning at the knee of Bill James and his Bill James baseball abstracts. One of the things that Bill James did back in the 1980s was a draft study where he found, this is very famous, that college players return something like twice as much value as high school players throughout the history of the draft. 15 years later, when I was writing for Baseball Prospectus, I decided to repeat the study, thinking we would find yet again that college players were dramatically more valuable than high school players. And I found, to my surprise, that since Bill had written his report in the mid 80s, that what he had found was true from the beginnings of the draft in the mid 60s through the mid 80s. But from that point on, things had changed. In the 1990s, college players returned something like 10% more value than high school players. Close enough that within the margin of error, you absolutely could justify drafting high school players. Well, what changed? A couple of things. One is high school players now go to things like the area code games and they play against the best high school talent in the country. So you get to see them against major league fastballs if you're a hitter, et cetera. But the big thing is teams started drafting more college players to compensate for the fact that college players were so much more valuable, right? So if when it was a resource that was only tapped into occasionally, it returned more value. But if everybody starts going after the valuable guy, suddenly they're not as valuable anymore because you're drafting them higher. And I do think that that's probably happened a little bit with young players for their draft class versus old. 15 years ago, when nobody knew about that, those guys were returning tremendous value. But I think that, for instance, that we've talked about Arjun Nimala. I think Arjun Nimala isn't even talked about as a potential first-round pick 15 years ago. I think part of the reason why he's looked at as a first-round pick is because of the age. So the fact that 12 years ago, Bubba Starling versus Francisco Lindor, you could have the same situation here, but I think it's very interesting that the rumors I've heard from multiple sources that while the Royals did take Blake Mitchell, they were heavily in discussion with about taking Arjun Nimala, who are at the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So I'm not holding his age against him. I do think it adds a little bit to the risk, but I think the fact that he's a high school catcher is a bigger risk. And to me, ultimately, what makes me worried is not even the risk. It's the fact that he wasn't rated among the top 12 or 13 best players in the draft, in the Royals took him 8th.
Well, and I think we'll know more if he comes in at an incredibly low signing bonus number. Then that's going to tell us a lot about, okay, what the plan is here with where they're going. But again, and I want to get to this in a minute because you and I were talking before we got started here about where are they going to spend it? What is the savings for?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we look at what they've done so far, we don't see it, right? We don't. There's not the obvious, Sean Manaea sitting there,
right?
That's the obvious. Okay, this is where the money's going. This was a guy who could have gone number one. So it's going to be interesting to see what other draft picks they do line up, and that will help us tell the story as to what they're thinking with the selection. Listen, I'm just going to say it for all the reasons you broke it down fantastically. He's old, not that old. He's not like wasn't. I would keep wanting to say Bubba Starling. Bobby Witt Jr. like 19.
Yes, Bobby Witt was birthday is June. He's my birthday, so I there's nothing wrong with being born on June 14th. But he was literally, he would have been 19 had the draft been held in July. I think it was still in June. He was like a week away from his birthday, but he was an older player, and that concerned me at the time quite a bit. And he's not.
But I remember
probably the best player still in this organization. So.
But I remember that at that time you said, yes, that was my original concern, but this is a guy that we knew was going to be top 5. Correct. When he was 17.
That was one of the reasons why I wasn't clear. Because even as a junior, we were hearing about him. This kid is, if he had been in the draft the year before, he probably would have been a top 5, top 10 player for sure.
Right. So
yes.
So that allied some of your fears on the age. That doesn't fly here. That was not the case. We weren't talking about Blake Mitchell being a top pick last year. So this is not a guy who arrived at 17, 18 years old and just wasn't eligible for the draft yet. This is a different story on that. So I want to point that out. But I mean, the only conclusion I can come to is, listen, I will give them their credit in the sense that they Frank Sinatra the hell out of this one. They're doing it their way. I mean,
that's a good way to put it. Yes.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts. They have a belief in what they do. Unfortunately, this is more of what they've done in the past. I don't think there's any way to describe it and say that, well, this is a whole new approach. This looks exactly like how they have been drafting since 2006. They march to the beat of their own drum. They do things their way, and nobody is going to bring them out of that approach. And that's scary. But if they're right, then okay, they're listening to the right people. They have to know. They had to have sat in a room I mean, I know Daniel Mack, I'm sure, put together a number of reports showing the history of high school catchers. How all they had to do was listen to local radio or open the newspaper, and you could see or read any one of the publications about what the lineage is of high school catchers versus college catchers. And yet they did it anyway. And it's either a sign of being immensely tone deaf to what's going on in your own industry, or it is a resolution that, look, at a time that we are not popular because we're not winning games, we've got a vote we're trying to get done, and this is not helping. And now we're going to go out and make what, listen, it's not the NFL draft. It's not like picking your first round pick in the NFL draft. But for baseball fans, there's all kinds of comments on here about players as we look at the chat room. And if you're catching us via the podcast, you can be a part of the conversation, part of the stream live 10 p.m. usually on Sundays, Monday because I was traveling and we wanted to get more of the draft in here to discuss. We're doing it here on a Monday night at 10. But there is still an interest. And they knew this was not going to be popular. There was no way this was going to be a celebrated pick, and they did it anyway. So, like I said, they did it their way, baby. And I honestly think that the leash gets shorter now with JJ Piccolo. And I don't like saying that. I like JJ Piccolo, the guy. I'm rooting for him. This kid's a Royal now. I'll root for this kid. But he can't not play the rest of this season. He can't bat 167 with a 44% strikeout rate. Unacceptable. He's going to have to hit the ground running. This has to be that they were the smartest kid in the room, and some people have, they act like the smartest kid in the room with no background, no reason for acting that way, was one of the comments we had earlier. And I get it. I don't know that, I always say, if not him, then who? And I believe that's an important thing to ask. If you're going to call for somebody's job, and if you're an owner of a team, or me as a media guy, if I'm going to say you got to fire JJ Piccolo, I need to be able to give you some names. I think that's always the case until your fan base says anyone. And they were at anyone on Dayton Moore. That's part of the reason why they accepted, to a degree, JJ Piccolo.
Yeah.
Who was an in-house
That's
guy.
Why I accepted it. I was just so happy that they had made a decision that perhaps, I was willing to accept a half measure instead of a full measure. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so, from that standpoint, I listen, he's got to play. He's got to play early. None of this hiding him on some backfield crap that went on for a calendar year with Frank Mazzucato. Now he's a hitter, so that should be easier to get him out there than a pitcher. But if we start hearing about reworking the swing or a football mentality, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the fan base may reach anybody's stage.
So the way I would put this, and this may surprise people who have seen my comments on Twitter, which have been less than complimentary of this draft, but the way I would put it is, I am not a fan of this draft. While I think it can work. It's not the approach I would have taken, but I am actually happy that this is the route that JJ Piccolo and Danny Ontiveros, in his second year as the scouting, as the director of this draft, with Lonnie Goldberg still there in the advisory role. But I am happy that this is the approach they took, because if they had gone chalk, right? If they had taken Kyle Teal and they had taken, whoever the consensus best player available was with their second and third picks, and it didn't work out, well, is the scouting at fault? Is the player development at fault? Did they just get unlucky? Like, it would have been very difficult to parse out blame. And if it had worked out, we still wouldn't know. Well, they took the best players available. They couldn't screw it up. By going this route, if it works, that will restore a fair amount of faith that I have in this current iteration of the front office, because they did something that was not particularly popular in the industry. I don't mean people hate their draft, but people look at it and based on the consensus of what people think in the evaluators in the public eye, the Royals overdrafted some guys. If it doesn't work out, they have no excuses. And like you said, the concern here is that the approach, it's not that the approach might work, might not work. We won't know for a while. It's that the approach looks identical to to the approach they've had for the last 15 years, which we have enough data to say, generally speaking, does not work. And the evidence I give to you for that is the 26 and 65 major league team. Now, I will say this. It could work. Blake Mitchell, I actually heard from people in the game, smart people I have tremendous respect for, who work for progressive winning organizations. When I was critical of the pick on Twitter, reached out to me and just said, this is actually a good pick. Like they based on their internal evaluations, Blake Mitchell is a good pick. I had one person who actually said that this is a much better pick than Arjun Nimmo would have been, just unprompted. So there's a lot of things here about Blake Mitchell that I do like. He was a Texas Player of the Year. I mean, he's not coming. This isn't Bubba Starling, who's an uber athlete, but coming from a no offense to Kansas City area high school baseball teams, but not a high level baseball environment. Who has a lot of development left. This is supposed to be a guy dominant in Texas. For whatever high school stats matter, he had 51 walks and 8 strikeouts this year. He had an OBP over 700. That's, in a high pressure environment like Texas high school baseball. That's impressive. So yeah, he should hit the ground running. This, JJ Cooper said it on the show last time. He remembers exactly where he was when he heard that Bubba Starling wasn't going out to full season ball the spring after he was drafted. Birth dates aside, if Blake Mitchell is not assigned to a full season league out of spring training next year, you might as well grab the pitchforks right then and there. Like, this is a guy, it's not always fair to evaluate, a high school player right away, but the fact that he is older means I think we can evaluate this one pretty quickly. Like, it's mid-July, he'll be signed hopefully in the next week or so. We better see some at-bats in an actual league that matters this year. Like, if they keep him, there's only 6 weeks left in the minor league season, and they say, well, we're just going to keep him in extended spring training, not send him to the complex league, that would be a really bad sign for a kid who's about to turn 19. This is a kid who should be in a full season league next year and should play well. And you know what? I think he might, because the sport has changed its evaluation tactics so much over the last 10, 15 years that maybe a 15-year data point like Kyle Skipworth doesn't matter anymore. The last high school catcher taken, in the top half of the first round was 2 years ago, Harry Ford, the Mariners' first round pick. The 12th pick overall.
Harry Ford,
12th pick, right-handed catcher. He is, he's 20 years old. Last year he had a 425 OBP. He had walked 88 times in 104 games in low A ball. This year he's in high A ball. He's at a 407 OBP, more walks than strikeouts. He was a top 100 prospect coming into the season, and he probably still is. He has a tremendous, he has, if Blake Mitchell follows his development path of Harry Ford, I'll be very happy. Now, Harry Ford is, a unique player for many reasons, one of which is, do you know what his first name actually is? It's not Harry. It's Harrison. Harrison Ford. Are you kidding me? Of course this guy's going to be a superstar. All right. Blake Mitchell is Blake. Okay, great. Well, Harry Ford wins. How is he not going by Harrison Ford? I don't know. Anyway, 80 grade name. So Ford wins on the name battle. But Blake Mitchell could work out. And if this is a matter of them saving money and spreading that money around, then I'm all for it. We just haven't seen that yet. And the difference is with, like, 2 years ago when they took Frank Mazzucato, everybody knew from the moment he was drafted, this is a signability pick, because there was an industry consensus. This is a guy who's like a bottom half of the first round talent. With Blake Mitchell, it's different. It's more of a bifurcated opinion. Some teams saw him as a late first round pick. Some teams did like him in the top 10 to 15. So I don't know how much money they're going to save. I'm under the impression it is under slot. How much, I don't know. And that's the problem, is that as soon as the Royals took Ben Caderna with their second pick, it's like, oh, okay, we see where they're going with this. The Royals didn't do that here. They took Blake Walters, who was taken about where he should be. He's actually one of the few guys that was drafted around where the consensus is. High school pitcher from Illinois, really good stuff, still kind of raw. But then their third pick, Carson Rocafort, was an overdraft by the consensus. Now, a lot of people like him. He's a college outfielder, could play center field, has some pop, but it doesn't seem like a guy that you're going to go way over slot for. If they did go over slot anywhere, it would probably be with the next with their 4th and 5th round picks, Hunter Owen and Spencer Nevins. Hunter Owen may be the second best player they took. I mean, he's a Vanderbilt lefty who was considered one of the 2 best college lefties in the draft, and some people thought he could go as high as the supplemental first round. So they did get some guys that fell a little bit in the draft, but then they took with their 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th round picks. They took signability guys. They took 3 college seniors and a lefty with a funky delivery. So what's interesting is we're assuming they're saving money with their first pick. We're assuming they're saving money with their last 4 picks, which is a common strategy because for those of you who are not familiar with the way the draft works, you have this pool of draft money, and that pool is determined by each pick in the draft is given a numerical amount. You add up the amounts for all your picks. That's how much money you can spend in the draft. I think the Royals are around 12.1 million total. But after the 10th round, starting tomorrow with the 11th round pick, teams can spend up to $150,000 without going into that draft pool. If they go above 150,000, then they have to tap into that draft pool. But if they only give tomorrow, if you give your 11th round pick $1 or $150,000, it has no effect on your draft pool. Today, it does. And that is why you see guys in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th round. Some of these guys are going to sign for $5,000, $10,000, because that money, that is whatever money you saved under the amount assigned for that draft pick, is money you can spend elsewhere. You can't do that tomorrow. So that's why teams will load up, save money in the late rounds of day 2, and then spend it in day 3. And that's why tomorrow, I think we're going to have a really good idea. Their first pick of the day, their 5th pick overall. They have the 5th pick in the 11th round. I am hoping we're going to see them. There are still a number of top 100 level talents on the board, and I'm really hoping we're going to see them spend some money. Pick a guy that's going to require a lot of money. Last year, they kind of did this. David Sandlin, their 11th round pick last year, got a little bit over. Yeah, I think maybe 400,000. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but over slot. And David Sandlin has been one of their bright spots in their pitching development in A-ball this year. And then, of course, with the very last pick of the day, they took Austin Charles last year, who's maybe as good a prospect as their first round pick, Gavin Cross now. So the point is, there's still time for them to explain this strategy, but right now, I don't see the player that they've drafted that justifies taking the Blake Mitchell. But 24 hours from now, I may feel better.
When was the last time the Royals hit on a guy that they paid over slot? I mean, really was productive. The Royals operate like the Braves, and I remember the book Scout's Honor, and they get, Ryan Langer hands. There's a whole chapter on how he got his 200 at-bats in the big leagues and how this was this incredible accomplishment, which to a degree it is. It's very hard to get players to the big leagues. I don't mean to minimize all the effort that goes into it by the players, the individuals themselves, and the organizations and what they do. But when was the last time, we can sit there and get excited about it? I mean, Sean Manaea was a trade piece. I'll listen to that. Was it Danny Duffy? Wasn't he? Jacob Junis he was way over slot. But
I was afraid to bring up Jacob Junis's name because I know he's controversial on this show. But that's the first name I think of. But that's the year the Royals literally blew the all-time record for most money spent in the draft.
Right.
Dayton Moore got David Glass to open up his checkbook. They gave Bubba Starling $7.5 million, and there were tons of overslot guys in that draft, and it was a pretty terrible draft. And Jacob Junis is the only thing that kind of salvaged it. I think it's like a 26th round pick. He got like $750,000.
So that's the other thing is they haven't been good at that. So
I would go further than that. They haven't been good at drafting, period. That's the thing. I mean, and that's the shadow that overlooks all of this. Because if you take this exact same draft and put it under the Dodgers, somehow the Dodgers had the 8th pick in the draft. Let's ignore that part of it. But if the Dodgers picking the exact same spots the Royals were picking, took the exact same players, I have no doubt the perception would be vastly different. Everyone would be like, the Dodgers must know something we don't. And you know why? Because they've earned it, right? The Royals have not earned the benefit of the doubt here. The Royals, what is the best single season of any player drafted by the Royals since Dayton Moore was hired?
So not like a Salvador Perez or anybody.
Yeah, so Salvador Perez is probably the best. I'm using Baseball Reference here just for simplicity.
But you're saying the draft because we're talking about the draft.
We're talking about the draft.
Latin American signing, which we'll get to.
What is the best player
in the Dayton Moore era?
Since 2007 or 2006, I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, 7 draft was the one that he'll take credit for. He,
06 he won't take credit for, but either way it wouldn't matter.
Is it Danny Duffy?
No, actually the best it's a tie. There's a pitcher and a hitter that both got 4.5 WAR. 4.5 is the absolute best season. Nobody's ever had
a Holland,
huh?
Greg Holland.
No, relievers. I mean, the best relievers don't get to that point. They might if it's truly elite, but no.
What am I missing here? Drafted by them. Am I missing somebody obvious? Moose or Haas or something along those lines? No.
Haas, I think, and Moose both got to the low 4s. The best season. Okay, for the best season by a pitcher. You're not going to like this one. Brady Singer last year, 4.5. Okay. The best by a hitter was Whit Merrifield, also 4.5. But at 4.4, this one made me laugh. And actually, by Fangraphs, clearly the best season ever by a Royals player, pitcher or hitter, drafted under Dayton Moore, Nicky Lopez.
Oh, wow.
He had 300. But the point is, nobody's gotten to 5 WAR. Nobody's gotten to 4.5 WAR. Here we go. Since 2010, because the Royals started drafting in 2006, 2007. So I'm not going to count the first couple years, but in the major league since 2010, 397 players have had there have been 397 player seasons. So some players may have done it more than once of over 4.5 WAR. All right. 397 among pitchers. I believe it's 198. None of those were by a Royal who was drafted after 2006, because Alex Gordon did it. They traded for Lorenzo Cain. He's done it. And yes, Salvador Perez one time, he had a 5.5 the year he led the league with 48 home runs. Although if you counted his pitcher framing, you may come that may even come down. But the point is, they have not the way what I'm trying to point is they have not drafted a star. In 16 years, they have not drafted a star. They have not drafted a single player who's had a star level season. All stars, about a 4.5 to 5 WAR is considered the point at which you make your all-star caliber player. And obviously, if you're a reliever, you're going to be an all-star without that. Players make the all-star team without that all the time. But at the end of the year, if you want to be considered a star, you should be in the probably close to 5 wins above replacement. Not one player has ever done that. Where are the stars? Bobby Witt might be that guy. I think he will be. I still believe. But draft a star. I think that's what the Blake Mitchell pick is about. They think this guy can be a star because of the positional value. My concern is catchers, even if they are stars, only play 130, 140 games. That's the other reason to consider not drafting. That's also why pitchers, I think even more than in the past, pitchers you really want to avoid taking early, because even if they are good, they don't throw enough innings to be stars. I just pointed out about almost 400 player seasons of 4.5 WAR, only 200 pitchers. Think about that. There's a 2-to-1 ratio of all-star caliber seasons between position players and pitchers. And that's because pitchers, the best pitchers today, throw 180 innings, maybe 200, it's elite now, not 250. And the smart teams have realized that rather than trying to find the next Justin Verlander or Roy Halladay, you draft a bunch of guys in the mid rounds, and you're going to get a bunch of them you're going to get a bunch of value out of your relievers anyway. So don't invest high draft picks in guys who are going to give you 80 great innings out of the bullpen, or probably 60 great innings out of the bullpen. Draft the hitters high, find the pitchers later, develop them, trade for them, pick them up off the waivers, whatever, but draft the hitters up front. So the Royals' first pick was a high school catcher. The second pick was a high school pitcher. It might work, but they are going against the odds here.
So, a couple of things I want to ask you here. By the way, we're brought to you by our friends at GAN Asphalt and Concrete. Absolutely the best in Kansas City, serving the entire metro area. If your business has problems with your parking lot, don't let the first impression you leave with your potential customers, your clients, be a bad one. Let GAN Asphalt and Concrete fix that parking lot. Full service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994 with free consultations, no commissions, and in house crews. Plus, every project coming with a written warranty. Why wouldn't you call GAN Asphalt and Concrete? Find them online right now at ganasphalt.com. A couple of things I want to ask you. Let me start with this one. This is what ESPN said. I don't know if this is Kylie McDaniel or who wrote the write-ups on these, but anyway, talking about Blake Mitchell. His defensive abilities are his calling card, but he also has plus power. He'll have to improve his swing and miss. He's already got a swing and miss problem at the high school level at 19 years old. Is there any reason to think this isn't going to be a high strikeout player?
Again, the strikeout to walk ratio in high school was, at a high level makes me hopeful that maybe that's overblown. I mean, he isn't striking out much, but clearly whoever wrote that and whoever wrote that as a scout or has talked to lots of them, has some concerns. It's definitely something to watch out for. I mean, one of the first things I will be looking at when he takes the field is how well he commands the strike zone. Because at his age, especially, to be an advanced, he should be a very advanced hitter. And if he's not commanding the strike zone now, it's going to be that much harder for him to learn it at the same time that he's also learning like how to be a major league catcher, because obviously as a catcher, he's going to be spending a lot more of his time working on his defense, perfecting his, even the best catching prospects have a lot to work on and working with your pitchers and communicate. Like there's so much that goes into that position, that it's going to be hard for him to develop that at the pro level. I think he might. I think he might come in. I think that might be overblown. And if he's walking a lot, I can put up with a little swing and miss, especially if he's hitting for power. I mean, I think he's supposed to have, potentially 30 home run power, and that will make up for some swing and miss. But there are a lot of ways this can go wrong. That doesn't mean it will. And if it doesn't, I'll give the Royals tremendous credit for making, a pick against the conventional wisdom that worked. But what have I said on this show so many times is that it's not enough for the Royals to avoid making the sort of hidden mistakes when they keep making the obvious mistakes.
Right.
And if this does not work out, if we look back and say that was a bad pick, taking a high school catcher with the 8th overall pick who was not rated that high by pretty much anybody will be an obvious mistake. And they can't afford to make any more of those. I'm hopeful this isn't. There are certainly pieces of evidence I can point to that say this is a savvy pick, that there is risk, but the reward is worth the risk. But you've said it 1,000 times, and you should say it 1,000 more. They're in the get it right business.
Yes.
And this time, if they don't get it right, they have no one to blame but themselves. They have no one they can pin this on but themselves. So they better get it right.
And the other thing I want to bring up is, his defensive abilities are his calling card, right? So we're not going to have to worry about him playing another position. He's going to be a catcher. That's what that says to me. If they start moving him out from behind the plate, they have screwed him up, right? Like according to these scouts, they've seen him play, or the people that wrote this who have talked to scouts, seen him play and say the defense, he's a catcher, right? Because if he's not a catcher, he's not Bryce Harper, right? There's no Bryce Harper type bat.
He's not Bryce Harper. I will say, I mean, the Royals, I believe it was Danny Oliveros who said, like, even if he wasn't a catcher, like if he was not a catcher, he would still be very, very high on our draft board, which I take to mean is his bat would play at another position. I've heard him say that his bat would play if he were a right fielder. So I'm taking that as a positive. That's not a reflection of, we're going to move him. It's just a reflection of his bat is special on top of his glove. But yes, if he's not a catcher. Maybe he's still a really good prospect. He's not the 8th pick in the draft. Even less justified that he would be taken this high. He was not the best high school hitter on the board at that point. Right. So, yes, if he moves out from behind the plate, or if his catching abilities prove to be wildly overrated, a la MJ Melendez, that will also reflect poorly on the team, because they are drafting him where they are because they think he can catch at an elite level as well as be an elite hitter.
I remember when they took Mitch Meyer, and immediately there was conversations about other positions. That is a bad sign. So, you know, he has to be good defensively, or they have screwed him up. I will stand by that, because you can't have everybody. You can't take him this high and not know his position, right? Can we all agree on that?
I think, I mean, if you take a guy who's like a shortstop but he might move to third base, that's one thing. But we've talked about this. This is the problem with catchers. There isn't an intermediate position where somebody who's, he's not great as a catcher. He's almost got the skills, but we can move him to another position that is still valuable, right? You can do that with shortstop. You can move him to third if he doesn't have the range. You can move him to second if he doesn't have the arm. Center, you could still move him to left or right. You lose quite a bit of value, but corner outfielder still a value. Catcher, there isn't an obvious fallback position, right? I guess if you get him young enough, you can try him in the outfield. But as we've seen with MJ Melendez, the skill set that makes somebody a catcher doesn't necessarily translate to the skill set to be an outfielder. You need to be able to run. And Blake Mitchell, I don't know if he's particularly slow, but I've not gotten the impression that he's a really fast runner. Kyle Teal was considered quite a fast runner, the Jason Kendall comp for starters. Blake Mitchell might be able to play corner outfield, but even if they do have to move him, not only are you losing the value of him playing an elite position, but there's no guarantee he would be like an elite defender. It's not like, well, he's an okay shortstop, but he's a great third baseman. We've had this discussion 1,000 times with Bobby Witt and Michael Garcia, and et cetera. A catcher who moves to another position is not automatically getting a defensive boost because, well, he's clearly overqualified for the position.
Right.
No, he might suck at another position like MJ Melendez has so far. So, yes, he needs to catch. There is not much of a backup plan here.
Yeah, and listen, and Matt brings us up. Craig Biggio is the outlier. Every scout seems to think they just found the next one. And I'm with you for the Craig Biggio who goes to second, the Todd Zeal who goes to third. Those are the exceptions. Those are not the rules, right? Like pretty much down to first base is all you got.
You basically brought up two guys who did that in the 20th century, so that gives you an idea of how common it is.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's not it. I want to bring this up because we've had a couple of questions along this, and Travis brought up a couple of names here. What does it say about Carter Jensen and Luca Tresh? Let's address that because it's different. Baseball's different than football. Like, right? They didn't just take a quarterback in the first round while already having Patrick Mahomes. That's not how baseball works. That's the first part of it. You take the best player, especially at number 8. It doesn't matter if you've already got that position. The idea being that you would trade them. But this is an organization that to this point has not been able to trade. Now, we mentioned the Aroldis Chapman trade, which we'll break down more later, but they haven't been very good at it. I mean, this would seem to be a sign, with MJ Melendez somewhat in the mix, liking Fermin, Luca Tresh being drafted, Carter Jensen, all that they feel like they will be able to start trading, right? Like, or do you look at it and say, oh, no, they've now given up on every one of those other catchers?
No, I don't think they have. And I think especially when you're taking a high school player where you're talking about years away, like if you're drafting a guy based on what you already have in the system, then you don't understand the point of the draft. You take the best player available, you work that out later. If you have 2 elite catching prospects, that is not a bad problem to have. You can trade one. Of course, if you have an all-star catcher in the major leagues and the catcher who just led the minor leagues in home runs, that also is not a bad problem to have because you can trade one unless you don't. Dayton Moore's not here anymore. Let us hope JJ Piccolo has learned that lesson and 100 more that Dayton Moore has taught us by not trading guys when he should have. But I'm not too worried. I mean, unfortunately, Luca Tresh, like at this point, probably more of a backup catcher projection than a starter anyway. Carter Jensen is the more interesting one because the upside there is still high. There is still a potential starter there. But there are some ways that can go wrong, both offensively and defensively.
You like Ryan? Oh
Yes.
God, I just looked up Carter.
Yeah,
Jensen's
the batting average is bad. He's still getting on base a ton, and he's still just turned 20 years old. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly not a can't miss. So this might be an acknowledgement that Carter Jensen is not the future behind the plate, but I don't think anybody knows yet. If Carter Jensen turns things around, I don't think he will lose value because the Royals also have Blake Mitchell. I consider those separate things. The Royals, that doesn't mean the Royals won't screw it up, but that's not because they drafted Blake Mitchell now. It's because they decided not to make a trade later when they should have.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Any thoughts on the next the other picks that we've got in? Yeah, I know you covered it briefly, but anything big you can take on it other than the fact that like these don't seem to be the guys that you saved all the money for. So tomorrow, what we're looking at is who is the big top 100 guys.
Right.
They end up spending the money, or they're paying Blake Mitchell top of the food chain money.
So if I've sort of written down here the way all the Royals draft picks were ranked by the various organizations, and if you rearrange the way they were, the order in which they were picked, the closest I can get to saying these guys justified their draft position, the list that's actually most optimistic. This will make you laugh. It's Keith Law again. Keith Law had Hunter Owen, who was the Royals took with their 4th round pick, 106 overall, had him 38th on his pick. So if you assume the Royals with pick 44 took Hunter Owen, who was ranked 38, then Blake Walters was taken instead of 44, was taken at 66. He was 61 on Keith Law's list. And then Spencer Nivens, who was the 5th round pick, the Royals took at 142. Keith also had him at 75. And then Hero Wyatt. So Hero Wyatt, also a 70 grade name. I look forward to this guy making the major leagues. It will be the PA whoever chooses the music at Kauffman, just an absolute dream player. You're going to play Holding Out for a Hero. You're going to play When a Hero Comes Along. There's going to be an endless variety of songs to choose from. He is a high school pitcher from Connecticut. Might sound familiar. That's Frank Mazzucato territory. Who was a lot of helium in this draft. I mean, Major League Baseball had him ranked in the 200s, but Baseball America had him at 142. Kylie McDaniel at 96. Keith Law had him at honorable mention, which was he had 100 guys ranked and then 30 guys on the honorable mention range. So if you put him at 106, then you can almost argue that that guy was in the right spot. So you could actually make a case where the Royals took guys where they deserve to go, except that Blake Mitchell was ranked 20th by Keith Law. And that's why, to me, it really does come back to Blake Mitchell. If they hit on Blake, then this draft will make sense. But you cannot waste a top 10 pick in this draft, which might be the deepest draft since 2005, since the Justin Upton, Alex Gordon, Ryan Braun, Ryan Zimmerman, Andrew McCutchen, the insane talent in that draft. That was the draft. The Mariners had the 3rd pick, took Matt Clement. That's the sort of thing you have to avoid when everybody else is getting a star in the top 10 or 15 picks and you don't. This is a draft where there's going to be the top 5. Everyone thinks they're all going to be stars, but there's going to be another 4 or 5 guys in that 6 to 15 range that are going to be productive, quality major leaguers. And if the Royals didn't get one of them, it really there's not enough talent that they got later in this draft that's going to make up for it.
Yeah, and what chance do you give it that we see an organizational like people let go from the front office? I mean, we've mentioned it. You come this far down the road, you pretty much got to dance all the way through this draft, and really even through the signing. So it probably wouldn't be like the next day because they've been talking to the parents and getting a feel for where they're at and all those kind of things. And the scouts would play a role in that as well. But I didn't hear the comments that I've listened to and read anything that sounds like they're about ready for a big upheaval.
No, I nor have I. I mean, ultimately, the person that we're going to hear that from is going to be, if not either JJ Picollo or John Sherman. And the problem is that you're not going to make a change before the draft, right? But you almost feel bad right after the draft letting guys go before they've had a chance to see how their players have panned out, right? But that's the nature of the beast. if you're going to make it, if the Royals are going to make a change with their scouting department, it has nothing to do with this year's draft. It's going to do with the 26-65 record, which we'll have all the rest of the season to talk about what's going on at the major league level. It's not the failure of the 2023 draft. It's the failure of the 2017 and 18 and 19 and 20, all these other drafts that have graduated players to the major leagues this year that have all collectively fallen flat on their face. But you and I have already sort of discussed this and come to a conclusion that, yeah, they have to make some pretty dramatic changes in the scouting department at the very least. My opinion on whether or not a complete overhaul is necessary or is already on the record. If it's not going to happen this year, then certainly next year's farm system development is an absolutely, they have to absolutely nail it. Like, next year has to be as good at the minor league level as this year has been bad. Like, they need to come out of next year with lots of helium and lots of top 100 guys in order to justify not just keeping Danny Ontiveros and Lonnie Goldberg and all those guys, but to justify JJ Piccolo, right? Like, if John Sherman is not going to make a move at the end of this season, and I don't expect him to, even though I think he would be completely justified to, I think that another bad or even mediocre year on the farm next year is enough time to have made a decision that this half measure did not work, and it's time to start over from, completely from scratch.
Yeah, and to go back to what we said about Mitchell needing to hit the ground running, being older, and the fact that this is not what the consensus would say you should do with this pick. They need to be right, and he needs to keep being right? Like, he needs to keep progressing. Like, they have to add impact players from the first round of the top 10. Because I think if he doesn't, you're going to have a top 3 pick next year. Why would you allow this group to pick again?
Sure.
Right. That's why would you entrust a pick that is supposed to be one that'll be a pillar of your franchise for years to come to the guys who just swung and missed down at 8. And I get it. If it was a 5-player draft, it's always however many players the Royals are picking after. Right.
And I know, obviously, the fact that there was a lottery this year and the Royals should have been picking 5th based on record is going to rankle a lot of people. I have a little bit of a hot take, which is that the Royals may end up being fortunate that they didn't get a lottery pick this year. The depth of this draft, the fact that there was 5 guys and that the 5th guy taken was a complete stud who would have gone 1-1 in some draft, that part doesn't really fit the take. But the reason why it might work out is there is another rule in the new CBA regarding the draft lottery, which is that you cannot get a lottery pick more than 2 years in a row. And in fact, if you're a revenue sharing team, in other words, a big market team, I don't think you can get it even more than 1 year in a row. So if you get a lottery pick 2 years in a row, not only are you banned from the lottery in the 3rd year, you actually can't pick in the top 10. So if you get a top 6 pick 2 years in a row, you're guaranteed to draft no higher than like 11th the following year. So if the Royals had gotten, here's the thing. At the end of last year, we were annoyed because, well, the Royals clearly are not going to be a lottery team next year. But now, of course, they absolutely are. And if they get a lottery pick this coming year, I mean, where they are, based on where they are now, they're almost certainly going to be a lottery team for at least 2 more years. And if they get the first pick or even a top 6 pick this coming year and they had gotten the 5th pick, they would have been banned from the top 10 the following year, even though in all likelihood they're going to be worthy of another top 5 pick. So keep that in mind, that there are penalties now for being really, really bad for many, many years, which is a good thing for the sport. But if the Royals don't get their act together, it's a bad thing for the Royals.
Our Coffin Corner podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete. If you want to be a part of one of the fastest growing, best companies in Kansas City, they're hiring at all positions: drivers, managers, operators, crew members, starting pay up to $30 per hour, based upon your experience, with paid time off and insurance, just to name a few of the benefits you can get at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Find out more info at GannAsphalt.com. Anything you want to wrap us up with here, Rany, about this draft, or a dream, a whim, a ray of hope, perhaps, or just more of your negativity? What would you like to
I'm
wrap us
going
with?
to keep dropping turds in the punch bowl. No,
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I will say, look, is
I got up at 9:00 last night this morning. Okay? That's what time I got up. So there's only so much of your downers I can take before I just crash.
I completely understand. Well, let me leave you on a positive note. Like it is still premature to evaluate this draft till we see what they do tomorrow. Like ideally, we probably would be helpful, and we can talk about it on Sunday, but it would be helpful to know what they're going to do tomorrow, because I look at this draft and they're going to spend the money. Like it would be malpractice to not spend every dollar you can in the draft, give or take 1% or whatever it is. And to the Royals, to their credit, in each of the last 2 years, I think at least, have taken a guy late in the draft who was a top 100 to 150 player, and they took Luke Tresh in the 17th round. They took Austin Charles in the 20th round, got both of them signed, and that added a top 100 and a fourth or fifth round talent late in the draft. Luka Tresh may or may not pan out. Austin Charles looks great. If they get an Austin Charles tomorrow, and I think they might be able to get two, they might be able to get one at the top of the day 3 and then the 11th or 12th round, and they may get one at the end once they know exactly how much money they have left and they can target exactly who they want. If they do that, this draft will make sense. It may not agree with the players they chose, but at least the philosophy will make sense, like the Mazzucata draft kind of did. So let's see what they do tomorrow. If they don't, they go tomorrow and they take a bunch of guys who none of these guys rank as a top 5 round talent. It's really going to be hard to explain what they were doing, unless it turns out that they gave Blake Mitchell full slot money, in which case, okay, then they're putting all their eggs in one basket, and that basket's name is Blake Mitchell.
Yeah, and all the more reason why Blake Mitchell would need to hit the ground running. I agree. Tomorrow's an important day to make sense of everything they've done in this draft. But the bottom line is Mitchell is going to have to produce. They're not going to be able to shy away from that. Top 10 picks need to produce for your organization. You just can't keep picking that high and get nothing from it. All right, that is the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli. My name is Soren Petro. Of course, we will be back talking trade deadline as we'll be creeping closer to that next week. We'll get into. I know we had some comments about the latest from John Sherman on where the stadium is. We'll get into that as well, as it'll be a fairly slow week with only a couple of games really to break down next week. So we will get into that. And of course,
let Soren sleep, everyone. Be patient. All right.
Yes.
Give the man a break.
Yes. And we will get into all of that next week. So for Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.